Hello friends, welcome to this special lecture Symbolic Expression, and as sign language expert with us in the studio Manisha Sharma is there, and the topic of today's discussion is the First World War and analysis of its causes and consequences in Europe and the world. And this is in the context of the series which we are going to start today, Issues in World History 1, the 20th century. And all of us as are aware about the consequences of the First World War and how it changed the world in that sense, and it also in a way tried to convey that how the rise of the Second World War was also connected, or the initiation of the Second World War was also connected with the First World War, as has been argued by various scholars. So, in the course of our discussion, we will try to see the various causes of the First World War, that the kind of how they were responsible for the war over a period of time, and when we talk about the consequences, we realize that how it changed Europe and the world as well. So, we will try to see that the kind of books which one can refer is in the framework of the references is one is by James Joel, Origins of the First World War, Norman Love, Mastering Modern World History, A.J.P. Taylor's First World War, Struggle for Mastery in Europe from 1848 to 1918, and E.J. Hobsbawm, Age of Extreme, Short 20th Century 1914 to 1991. So, these are some of the readings which one can refer when one is talking about the First World War. And when we tend to understand the First World War in the framework of the causes of the war, we find that the scholars, they have tried to see the varying causes for the First World War, the short term causes as well as the long term causes. For example, the military alliances, they have been talked about in the framework that how each country was trying to align with some other country. So that was one of the causes of the First World War. The immediate cause is being talked about in the framework of the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the successor to the Austrian throne, and how he was being killed. That was one of the immediate causes of the First World War. And when we tend to see it in the framework of the long term causes, we realize that how this kind of a situation was simmering in Europe, and it needed some kind of a spark by which the war started. And when we see that how various kinds of factors, whether the political, diplomatic, socio-economic, psychological, all of them they played an important role. And historians, they have talked about the varying causings and the importance of these causes in their own context. And as I told you that how the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife in Sarajevo, which was the capital of Bosnia, in June 1914 by a Slav named Gavrilo Princip, and which led to a situation which caused the First World War. And we see that during this particular period how the governments of different countries, they reacted to this kind of a situation, also created a situation which led to the First World War. And if we see the background of the various kinds of alliances during this time, and how Germany's alliance with Austria, which was a defensive alliance in 1879, and thereafter in 1882 Italy joins this Austro-German alliance, and famous Triple Alliance was formed. And thereafter we also see that the Franco-Russian alliance in 1891 and the Anglo-Russian Convention of 3rd August 1907, which led to the birth of Triple Entente. So in this way, how two blocks, they were being created during this time, and this creation of two blocks, how the allied powers and the Axis powers, both of them, it created a situation where we find that they were trying to exert authority for themselves, and it also created some kind of a bad blood among these countries. And finally, such kind of a situation where these countries, they were competing against each other, they were these two blocks, they were united in their own way, because of which we find that it led to the First World War. We also see during this time that in some of the countries militarism was also growing, which created some kind of a suspicion and evil of espionage which was there. And we see that in some of the regions, a powerful clan of the military and the naval officers who tried to dominate over the civilians was also there. And when we tend to understand it, it can be implied as an influential body of military and naval officers whose psychology was naturally colored by possibility of an early war. So we see that when we have such kind of people, those who have such kind of tendencies which are connected to military, and they are seeing an opportunity to go to the war. So this was a situation in Europe at that point of time, where we find that some of the officers, those who were from the military, they were sensing an opportunity for the war. Apart from that, we find that the ideas of pan-Germanism, pan-Slavism and revenge of France, they were trying to perpetuate hatred between Germany and her two neighbors, Russia in the east and France in the west. And apart from that, we also see that the Bosnia crisis of 1908, Austrian annexation of the Turkish province of Bosnia, it shattered the dream of Serbia of the pan-Slav political expansion. So such kind of ideas relating to narrow nationalism at that point of time, that was also being seen as responsible for the First World War. And when we talk about this kind of an antagonism during the Bosnia crisis, we find that the Serbian blood boiled to think that Serbia had lost a legitimate field of expansion at that point of time, and Bosnia had 3 million Serbs among its population. We also see the situation of the Balkan wars. During the first Balkan war, the Balkan League, consisting of Serbia, Greece, Montenegro and Bulgaria, and how it attacked Turkey and captured most of her territory in Europe. And at a peace conference at London, an independent state of Albania was created to prevent Serbia from getting an outlet to sea, so that she would not become too powerful. So this kind of a situation at this point of time was also creating a lot of pressure, tension in different countries which were involved. And in this context, we also find that how Bulgarians were also unhappy, as their hopes of securing Macedonia, they were being dashed, and most of it was given to Serbia. And how Bulgaria attacked Serbia, starting the Second Balkan War in 1913, and Greece, Romania and Turkey, they supported Serbia, and Bulgaria was defeated. So this kind of a conflict in this particular region was also seen as some kind of a prelude to the First World War, and we see that how Serbia became stronger and decided to foment trouble among the Croats and Serbs inside Austria-Hungary, while Austrians were equally ready to crush Serbian designs. And this kind of a situation, which was linked to the Balkan after 1913, had reached from where no stepping down was possible, and war was now appearing to be only a matter of time. And we see that how the powers in Europe, they were also taking sides at this point of time, and England, France and Russia each had acquired large colonial possessions in different parts of the world. And we see that Germany wanted to secure more and more colonies for itself, protectorates and the spheres of influence in the markets to increase her prestige, and power struggle for colonies was also going on. So this kind of struggle for colonies was also one of the reasons where the nations who could not have colonies in the earlier time, now they wanted colonies for themselves, Germany being one of them. And this created some kind of a competition and conflict between these countries as well. And we also find that the role of media at that point of time was also in that context, where we find that the jingoistic approach of the newspapers and in their respective countries could be seen, and a number of issues which they raised, they exaggerated them, and they engaged in attacks and the counter attacks till a newspaper war was started. So, this also in a way poisoned the public opinion and created bad blood among various countries as well, because the press was reporting in a very high voltage kind of a situation, and when this kind of a news reached other countries, then it also created bad blood among nations as well. And we find that apart from this, there were other reasons as well. The countries, other countries, they had a number of aims and objectives to fulfill. For example, France, how Alsace and Lorraine was taken from them during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71, and French, they wanted Alsace-Lorraine back now, and Germany wanted to be a superpower or a world power at that point of time, and it wanted to in a way expand itself, it wanted to secure colonies for itself. And Italy's desire for irredentism, Italians, they wanted to recover Trentino and areas around port of Trieste, which were inhabited by the Italians but were still under domination of Austria-Hungary. As these regions were once a part of the Roman Empire, and the Italians brought the issue of Italia Irredenta or unredeemed Italy. So, these kinds of issues where the ambitions of the various countries, they were also there, they could also be seen during this time, and how these ambitions, they were fueling the fire of these countries, and they were also ready to go for any kind of a conflict to secure these kinds of positions for themselves. And when we tend to understand the First World War, we find that the views of the historians, they have also been important from that perspective. And when we tend to understand it, we find that there was no machinery to regulate the international affairs at that time. And if some kind of a machinery could have been there, as later we find League of Nations, then some of the scholars, they have argued that then world war could have been avoided. And when you talk about other view, the popular view, we find that was a result of the old diplomacy and an alliance system which was based on secret agreements. So, it has also been argued that the system of secret alliances was an important cause for the First World War. And we see that how over a period of time some kind of a deliberate attempt by the governments to distract attention from insoluble in the complex domestic problems by means of an active foreign policy and an appeal to national solidarity in times of war. So, this view has also been propagated that how the governments, they wanted to deflect the attention of the countrymen from the pressing social and other kinds of issues in their own country. So, this idea of nationalism, so as to deflect the attention of the people from their own domestic problems, was seen as one of the ploys by which the governments, they could deflect the attention. We also see that some of the German scholars as well, Fritz Fischer was one, and he in a way conveys or argues that Germany was deliberately and consciously went into war so as to attain world supremacy. So, this idea of German supremacy was there in the mind of the Germans at that point of time, and they in a way wanted that how when they were not able to secure colonies as the other countries were. So, now was the time for them where they could secure colonies for themselves. And we also see that others, they have argued that Germany sought war because she felt encircled and threatened by the British naval supremacy and by a large scale Russian military expansion. So, it was the fear of the other nations and how these nations, they were trying to in a way encircle Germany, and British had a naval supremacy in that context, and German and Russian military expansion was also happening. So, because of which we find that how Germans, they felt that they have to become some sort of a superpower, and then when they will be able to expand themselves, then only they will be able to achieve those objectives. And we see that some kind of views with regarding the idea of the First World War is that German generals, they felt that a preventive war must happen before the end of 1914, as Russia would grow stronger after that. And there are others, those who have argued that Germany did not want a major war at all, and Kaiser William II and Chancellor Bethem Hollweg, they in a way believed that the strong backing of Austria would force Russians to become neutral, but it was a sad miscalculation if that was true. So, we find that during this time a number of scholars, they have tried to in a way interpret the situation in this context, that what were the reasons of the war and how these reasons in varying degrees played an important role where we see the outbreak of the war. And LCF Turner, he has argued that the war was caused by a tragedy of miscalculations, as Austria miscalculated by assuming Russia would not assist Serbia, and Germany miscalculated by providing help to Austria with no conditions attached. But we have to also see that that a war of such a scale could not be seen in the framework of miscalculations, as the scale and the enormity of the war was huge, and the kind of decisions which were being taken by the respective nations, they should have been very well thought about during this time. And he is also in a way, the scholars, those who see it in the framework of miscalculations, they have also in a way argued that the politicians in Germany and Russia, they miscalculated by thinking that mobilization would not lead to war. And all these kinds of miscalculations, they ended up as a serious error of judgment on the part of the leading rulers, politicians and the military officials, as we see that how this kind of a situation led to the war. And we also see scholars like G.P. Gooch, S.B. Fay, they held that the war was collective responsibility of all the powers, those who had participated in it. So, it was some kind of a valid or some kind of a rational argument that all the nations, those who were participating in the war, they were held responsible for it. So, Gooch and Fay, both of them, they made this kind of an argument, and this argument is correct as well, that how all these kinds of powers, those who were delving in the power politics and those who wanted to secure more and more control for themselves, and this situation led to the First World War. Then we also see that some of the other scholars like A.J.P. Taylor, F. Fisher, they once again held that it was Germany who had engineered conflict in pursuit of its expansionist aims, and others like G. Petter and Turner, they challenged this idea and once again emphasized on collective responsibility of all the nations. So, we find that different scholars, they have given their interpretations, and in their interpretations different kinds of ideas they have been given with regard to the origins of the First World War. And as Taylor and Fisher, they have in a way held Germany responsible in terms of creating conflicts at that point of time and how Germany wanted to expand itself. They have argued from that perspective, and on the others, the other scholars like Turner and Petter, as has been communicated earlier as well, that they were talking in the framework of the collective responsibility of all the nations, that how all these nations, they were collectively responsible for the First World War, because from their own conscience, from their own understanding, they were deliberately taking decisions, and those decisions, they finally led to the First World War. And when we talk about the causes which have been given by scholars, Fay has argued 5 fundamental causes of the war: economic imperialism being one, growing militarism of European powers, new nationalism, jingoistic press, and importantly crystallization of the system of secret alliances and alignments in Europe. So, we find that scholars like Fay, they have talked about economic imperialism in the framework of securing more and more colonies for themselves, that how various countries, they were in a way coming into conflict with each other so as to secure the colonies for their own betterment. Secondly, we also see that there was some kind of a militarism in the European powers, and this kind of a military streak in the European nations was also seen to be as one of the factors for the First World War. Then this idea of new nationalism, which was also one of the factors which led to the First World War, and how these nations, they were trying to see nationalism in their own way. And then we also have argued in the framework of jingoistic press that how press was also trying to foment trouble, in the sense that it was trying to defend and in a way its own country, and this kind of a press war in that sense also created an international situation which finally led to the First World War. And we also talked about the crystallization of the system of the secret alliances and alignments in Europe as well. Because of these secret alliances, we see that how different countries they join together, they group together, and at many points of time their alliances were also unconditional, and which created a situation of the war. And other scholars like David Thompson, he has argued that the greater European powers, they had grouped themselves into two blocks where military belts were more defensive in nature, and these were basically the diplomatic alliances aiming to prevent war. Thus each alliance also considered possibility of war. So scholars like Thompson, they had in a way talked about these kinds of blocks and how these were the defensive blocks, and they were in a sense diplomatic alliances as well, and they wanted to prevent war. And but at the same time, these blocks, they were also seen as responsible for fomenting trouble and leading to the war. And we also see that as most of these alliances, they were inspired by peace. Thompson calls this diplomatic revolution as well. So in the framework of the various causes, we will talk about the other causes in our next lecture. Thank you very much.